Welcome to the Leverage Your Potential podcast. This podcast is hosted by the Director and Assistant Director of Menlo College's Office of Internships, Career Services, and Study Abroad, Dylan Houle and Kelly Davis, in partnership with Menlo's Content Creation Club.
Welcome to today's episode of Leverage Your Potential. Today we have Vice President Angela Schmiede, Vice President of Student Success, and I'm your host, Dylan Houle, Director of Internships, Career Services, and Study Abroad. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Dylan.
Well, I'd like to start with just a general introduction. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here at Menlo College.
Sure. Well, I've been at Menlo for about 7 years now, and as you mentioned, I currently serve as Vice President for Student Success. In that role, I oversee all of our student services, which includes internships, career services, study abroad, academic advising, student affairs, and all of our tutoring programs. I'm also the project director for our 5-year student success grant through the U.S. Department of Education, and I serve as the accreditation liaison officer for WASC, which is our regional accrediting agency. So in all these different roles, I feel fortunate to have a really great team in place to support Menlo students, particularly during this difficult time during the pandemic. So I appreciate all that you are doing as well to support our students during this time.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. And yes, for those of you that are listening, maybe at a later date, we are right now in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Menlo College has gone online and much of the country right now is shut down. So that leads right into the topic of today's podcast, which is resiliency. And I'm really excited to talk with you about this because I feel like you have a lot of good ideas around it. Having worked with students in experiential education and internships, a lot of that work is about building resiliency in students and getting them ready for the world of work. So my first question for you, Angela, is how would you define resiliency, and how do you think it's different than being flexible or adaptable?
Well, flexibility and adaptability are two elements that enable you to be resilient. So, personally, I define resilience as the ability to recover from adverse situations. So having flexibility can help you adjust your expectations, and adaptability can help you switch gears. But at the end of the day, resilience is what allows you to get up and move on when things don't work out as planned. It's important to recognize that this can be particularly difficult if you're dealing with multiple challenges in your life, or if you suffer from depression or anxiety. I know some of our students are challenged by that, so it's important to address those issues initially as well. I think resilience is important both when you have failed at something and need to recover from that, or when something out of your control changes your life in a negative way. So the latter seems to be most applicable to our conversation today when we think about the COVID-19 crisis here. I'm quite certain that our Menlo juniors and seniors did not plan on COVID-19 to potentially disrupt their internship and job plans for this summer. So we're all having to adapt and adjust here carefully. When you talk about resilience, the career management course that we've both taught, that you currently teach here at Menlo College, we have students read a really excellent book called The Startup of You. So the book really encourages students to plan for resilience and to take an entrepreneurial approach to career management. So one of the core concepts is the concept of creating a plan A, a plan B, and a plan Z. So plan A is essentially, as a student, you're going to talk about what, from your career perspective, it's what you really want to do, and you create a plan around that. Plan B you may not have initially, but it might be where you adapt if things aren't quite working out with plan A, or maybe you find another path that's of greater interest than plan A was. Plan Z is something you do need to plan out for, and that's really your worst case scenario plan. No one likes to plan for worst case scenarios, but at least that plan will give you a safety net to continue to pursue what you really want to do. And what that might mean in the interim is that, you're living with mom and you're delivering DoorDash while you're trying to secure that job that you really want, or you're working on that startup that might take a couple of years to really launch.
I'm glad that you brought up The Startup of You by Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn. Another concept from that book that I really enjoy and that I think is applicable to this moment is the concept of permanent beta, and always being in a state of self-directed learning and finding out what your weaknesses are or gaps in knowledge are, and trying to find ways to fill them or become better at some specific skill or competency. And I think in this moment, for students, it really does shine a light on some perhaps areas in which they could improve, whether that be their communication skills for online work, online teamwork, etc., or technological skills, using Zoom and things of that nature that we're all adjusting to quite rapidly. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, the permanent beta, I think, is a really important mindset to have, especially now. And if you're a Menlo student, make sure you check your email from me from last week, where I sent a number of resources that will help you keep your skills up to date and retool if you need to.
Yeah, exactly. LinkedIn Learning and Allison.com and all of those great online resources.
Mm-hmm.
Now, speaking of lifelong learning and, thinking about how to progress to the next step, I'd like to talk a little bit about your own career path to the Vice President of Student Success from where you started. So at Menlo College, you joined in 2013 as the Director of Internships, which is the position I now hold. So I feel honored to succeed you in this role. But I would like to go a little bit further back, and maybe you can take us from when you graduated college to where you are now, and what that path was like and what some of the challenges were that you faced. Obviously, nothing quite like what we're going through now, but I know that there have been some things that have happened in your own career that have required, some resilience on your part.
Mm-hmm. Well, I received my Bachelor of Science from Vanderbilt University, and I had the misfortune of graduating during an economic recession as well. And it was right on the cusp of the Gulf War back in 1990. So very few companies were hiring. My fellow graduating seniors and I were all interviewing the few slots that were available, but very few positions were open. I was fortunate that I had a professor who served as my thesis advisor, and he encouraged me to apply to a one-year master's program in human resource development at Vanderbilt. I'd already taken one class in there, and I enjoyed it. He said that if I got into the program, he would offer me a teaching assistant fellowship that would pay for my tuition. So while graduate school was not in my immediate plans, I recognized that this was an opportunity opening up to me. And I was fortunate to have that experience turn into a full-time job at Vanderbilt, where I was able to develop a passion for higher education. I think people talk about follow your passion. I'm a believer that sometimes you just have to explore different opportunities and passions develop. You don't necessarily start with a passion. So I was really glad that taking that fork in the road allowed me to discover that I loved working in higher ed. I was pretty comfortable at Vanderbilt. I worked there for 5 years. I learned a lot. It was a great experience. I had good mentors. But at some point, I realized that in order for me to take the next step of my career, I needed to pursue a PhD. So I stepped out of my comfort zone. I grew up in the South. Vanderbilt is in Nashville, Tennessee. And I decided that, at this point, I really want to pursue graduate programs either on the East Coast or the West Coast. So that's where I narrowed my applications. And I knew that was really going to further push me out of my comfort zone. So I ended up, after applying to several schools, I ended up in a PhD program at Stanford University, where I spent 6 years there pursuing my PhD and a master's degree. Stanford's interesting. It was a wonderful, fantastic learning experience. It can be an intimidating place. You hear the term imposter syndrome, and that's certainly something that I think a lot of people feel when they get into an environment like Stanford. So it takes a while to realize, yes, I belong here and I should be here, and to make the most out of that experience. But again, in the end, it was a fantastic learning experience. And around that time, I was married, and I decided to have kids. So I took a few years off from full-time work. I was still teaching part-time, but I wanted to spend time with my kids until they were school age. And then we had just moved to Portland, Oregon, and my kids were starting school, and I decided that I wanted to re-enter the job market before my credentials and my experience were kind of getting too dusty on the shelf and were becoming too dated. So this was in 2008, and so I, updated my resume. I'm drafting cover letters, and about a week after I started sending out cover letters and resumes, Lehman Brothers, one of the largest banks in the world, collapsed. So this was the start of a big downward economic spiral. So I had just applied for a number of positions in the Oregon public higher education system. And at this point, I wasn't getting rejection letters. I was getting letters saying that the positions had disappeared because of budget cuts. So I didn't even have the opportunity to go through a traditional rejection when I was going through my job search. So it was really quite a different situation. And, and I think about where we are today, I think there might be some similar parallels to that. As you may recall, I don't know what age you were back in 2008, but that was a difficult time. So after a few months of continuing to unsuccessfully to try to find a job in higher education in Oregon, I had this aha moment, and maybe this was my plan B that I should have had all along, but I decided that I needed to expand my job search outside of higher education. And once I was able to make that pivot, both in my mindset as well as my job search approach, I was actually able to secure a job within 2 weeks. So it just took that shift in perspective that enabled me to do that. So I ended up working for an environmental nonprofit as director of education. It wasn't higher ed, but I ended up doing a lot of the same things that I would have done in higher ed, whether it was curriculum development, recruitment, navigating education regulations, all of those things. And eventually I was promoted to associate executive director, and I gained some really valuable experience in nonprofit management that I didn't expect to gain. A lot of that knowledge and those skills are really useful to this day. So after 4 years of working at that nonprofit, the position at Menlo College to build its new internship program came across my desk. So I wasn't looking for a new job, but I was intrigued by this because it gave me a path back to higher ed in an area where I had unique experience. So I had helped run an internship program at Vanderbilt University, and I loved my job in the nonprofit, but I was missing being in the higher education setting. I interviewed for and accepted the job at Menlo, and after launching the internship program, I gradually took on additional responsibilities and was promoted to dean and eventually vice president for student success, where I am now. And it's interesting, as I look back on my career, most of the positions I've had, I've gained through networking or just these serendipitous opportunities. But ironically, the 2 times in my life where I was looking for a job and was not currently employed, I was searching during economic recessions. So I have a lot of empathy for those currently on the job market. So the takeaway for me from all this is, while I didn't end up where I thought I would in those 2 situations, I was able to leverage my situation into new opportunities that in the end were quite beneficial to me in ways I hadn't expected.
Angela, thank you so much for taking us through that. I think there's a lot of wisdom in all those different parts of your career path. One that stood out to me is kind of what you pointed to at the end of your comments, which is kind of these serendipitous moments that lead us onto a path that we didn't predict for ourselves. And so when you mentioned being offered that teaching assistant position that got graduate school onto your radar, and how that hadn't been on your radar previously, I had a similar experience when I was moving to New York City to be an English teacher through the Teaching Fellows program, learning about that program, and then being able to get a subsidized master's degree, which I had been really considering, how was I going to get a master's degree, or was graduate school in my future, or was a teaching credential going to be all that I was going to pursue at that time? So it's just interesting, these serendipitous moments, these people, these programs that come across our desk, and all we have to do sometimes is be willing to say yes and take that chance.
Absolutely. And to pursue opportunities too. I mean, I wouldn't have had that opportunity had I not chosen to do a senior thesis, and a senior thesis was not something that was required for my degree. I just thought it might be a good experience to do it. And out of that, I built a really close relationship with one of the professors. So for those of you out there, it's really important to build those deep relationships with professors and other mentors that you might have an opportunity to build a relationship with, because it's especially times like this where those relationships can really be useful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my next question is a little philosophical. When it comes to resiliency, being resilient,
Mhm.
do you think it's something that a person is, or do you think it's something that a person becomes? And do you think you started off being resilient, or did you become resilient over the course of your career and life?
That's a bit of a nature versus nurture debate, and I think that a little bit of both probably plays into who we are. Some people are born with innate characteristics, and I think that allows them to be more resilient. So, for example, if you have a flexible mindset, however, like anything, you can flex those mental muscles, and you can develop strategies to improve your resilience when you experience adversity. uh, Developing what I call a bias to action can go a long way towards developing resilience. This is versus paralysis. I think a lot of times when I see students or young people in situations like this, it's easy to move towards paralysis and not know what to do. But if you have a bias to action, doing something is better than doing nothing, and it will move you on a path forward. I used to tell my kids when they were younger and they were being a little either paralyzed or stubborn, I said, you don't have to want to do something to do it. So sometimes just taking that first step will help you start adapting and moving forward again.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a couple things, but one that most prominently comes to mind is fake it till you make it.
Exactly.
Just take that first step and just get yourself going
That's right.
in one direction or another.
Hmm.
So, the current moment aside, and you touched on the recessions that you've searched for jobs in, those moments aside, are there any other experiences in your life that have required you to be resilient? And does resilient, in your opinion, mean simply weathering the storm and then returning to normal? Or does it mean growing or changing in some fundamental way?
Those are really great questions. I think our childhood experiences often shape who we are as adults and moving into adults. My parents and their families were refugees in Europe during World War II, and both of my parents immigrated to the United States. My father when he was 15 years old, and my mother when she was 25 years old. And my father didn't adapt well to US high school. They didn't have good English skills when they moved here. And he actually dropped out of high school in 10th grade. However, he was very entrepreneurial, and he started his own successful business. And my parents at that point were married, and my mother helped him. So I think their entrepreneurial spirit and their willingness to step outside of their comfort zone and that resilience was modeled for me from a young age. And I think that has been really formative to my own life experiences and how I react to change, not just as a model, but I think anytime I want to feel sorry for myself about something, I just have to think about their resilience and what they were able to survive, particularly during World War II and making a transition about coming to a foreign country and not having the language skills. So I think that was quite formative. And then as a child growing up, my parents divorced when I was 7, which is always, I think, challenging for young children to experience. And my mother, she was a wonderful mother, but she had numerous health problems throughout her life. And at times I had to be her caregiver, even though I was young. But I think that gave me a lot of independence and some skills that I wouldn't normally have gained either. My father was killed in a plane crash just as I was getting ready to start high school. So I think that was another formative experience for me, because I'm getting ready to think about the next step of my life into adulthood at that point. And although neither of my parents graduated from a 4-year college, I was first generation, they did recognize the importance of education. Although here I am, I'm a junior or senior in high school, and my father's gone, and my mother has serious health issues that are keeping her distracted on that. So I was pretty much on my own when it came to navigating the college search and the application process. I think their belief that education was important was kind of the key driving force. But I also, where I went to high school, it was in a rural area, and the guidance office, they basically had a formula or a multiple choice option when they met with with students about going to, what to do after high school graduation. Your options were either to work, go to the community college, or go to the University of Tennessee. So there wasn't much discussion about what's best for you, what are some of the options you look at. So I'm not sure my decision-making process was the most informed, and I certainly could have used more guidance as a 17-year-old, but I think being forced to be more independent throughout my childhood and teenage years really helped serve me well during that process and over the years. So I think that's where a lot of my resilience was developed and built. Your second question asks about the nature of resilience. I think there are different levels of resilience. So if you are, say you're a student and you fail a calculus course, that requires some resilience. It's a big disappointment. Eventually you figure out what you need to do differently. You take the course again and you quote unquote return to normal. But if you have a situation that's a major loss, so for example, if you lose a parent as a child, I think it does change you in a fundamental way, and you have to find a new normal, which is different than returning to normal.
Angela, I learned a little bit about you just now. So thank you for sharing those life moments with us and how they contributed to your resiliency. You certainly had a lot to experience even before you went off to college, when a lot of students, I think, experience their first moments of being resilient. You had come already to that situation with a lot under your belt and a lot of experience. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
To share a little bit of some of my own thinking on that question, it's similar to yours. I think there are some things that we weather the storm and then we return to normal, and then there are some things where we weather the storm but we're forever changed.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of right down the middle for me was after college. One of the motivating reasons that I moved to New York City was to put myself in a situation that would require me to be resilient. My growing up story stands a little bit in contrast to yours, where I didn't experience a lot of those challenges and didn't have a lot of those experiences growing up. And even all the way through San Francisco State University, my undergraduate years, I didn't experience what I would call anything that required me to be resilient. It was a very streamlined path. And I remember thinking after graduating SF State that I wanted a challenge. I wanted something that would kind of put me in context. And I moved to New York City for that very reason, and very soon discovered all sorts of situations that would challenge my resiliency. And we all know New York City is, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And I really wanted to put that to the test. And so I think, for the students or the people listening, you may have a situation or life experiences similar to Angela's, where you've dealt with a lot of experiences that have required resiliency and learned a lot from it. Or maybe you're in a place that's more like where I was in college, where things had gone relatively smoothly and you're looking for a challenge. And I encourage you to take those challenges and put yourself in context and see what you can handle and what you will handle, and how you'll grow and change out of it.
Absolutely. And I think those opportunities, whenever you have the opportunity to put yourself outside of your comfort zone, I'm thinking about our students who choose to engage in study abroad. Wow, you think about the transformation that happens and the resilience that gets built during those experiences. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Students always come back from those experiences completely changed, with a new kind of outlook on life and a new sense of respect for themselves and what they were able to accomplish. It's quite amazing to see the transformation that happens over anything from a 2-week program to a full semester program.
That's right.
So coming to our last couple of questions on the topic of resiliency, this is just a broad-based one, and we've touched on it in a few different ways over the course of this interview, but maybe in summary, what advice do you have for our current students, specifically our graduating seniors and our internship cohort, our juniors, but also our freshmen and sophomores, and even students that are considering coming to Menlo College? What advice do you have for them for being resilient and building resiliency during this time and beyond?
In addition to creating what we talked about, the plan A, the plan B, and the plan Z in particular, that worst case scenario, I think there are a number of things that Menlo students can do right now to build resilience. Probably one of the most important things, and students may have already realized this, is to foster or build a support network. And that can be friends, family, mentors. It's important to have a diverse network. And what I mean by that is you need to have somebody in your network who has good listening skills and empathy and can be that ear that helps get something off your chest, and can be reflective. You also need somebody who can kind of kick you in the butt when you need it and to give you that feedback truthfully and constructively when no one else will. We all need that person in our lives. And then finally, I think the third type of person you need in your network is somebody who can provide you with practical resources, whether that's a meal if you need one, a computer if you don't have one and you're moved to online courses, or a lead for a job that maybe you're struggling to find. The second piece of advice I have is don't be afraid to ask for help. And we typically tell Menlo students this from their freshman year on. Some students take advantage of it early on, others wait until pretty late in their Menlo career, and I think they wish they'd taken advantage of all the help and resources that are provided to them earlier. People want to help, but they aren't mind readers. I mean, during the past month of shelter in place, I've heard from a number of students who have asked for help, whether it's they didn't have Wi-Fi for remote learning, or even in some cases, they didn't have a place to sleep. So here at Menlo, we can help remove those barriers for your well-being and success often, but you do need to ask. So don't be afraid to ask for help. The third piece of advice I have is to set small goals. Again, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and to get into that state of paralysis when you're facing a difficult situation. But achieving small goals will help you feel like you're making progress and keep you going. So for example, one goal can be to sign up for the workshop that Kelly is offering tomorrow. Or another goal might be just to update your LinkedIn profile. And then your next goal will be, okay, I'm going to send messages to 5 contacts in my LinkedIn database to let them know that I'm on the job market. So break it down into things that feel more manageable for you. And a second part of that that's important is focus on what you can control. It's easy to focus on all the things that are out of your control. You can't control that your internship organization just canceled their summer internship program. That's out of your control. But you can control is how you respond to that and the opportunities that you might be able to find out of that. So for example, when you get that call, the summer internship has been canceled, I'm so sorry, we're going to have to rescind your offer. Take the time to ask, is that same internship available for this academic year, or is it available for next summer? Is it available to work remotely? So look at what options might be available. If the answer to all of those questions is no, ask if the organization can refer you to other internship programs that might still be seeking interns. They have their own networks. So keep in mind, they chose you to be the summer intern and they have faith in your abilities and they want to be helpful because they know this is not a good situation for you. So think about, how can you leverage a situation that's out of your control and shift the situation to one where it is in your control. And finally, take care of yourself. I mean, that's one that's easy to forget, but it's probably the most important thing. Make sure you're exercising regularly, you eat right, and most importantly, that you get enough sleep. This is good advice at any point in time, but especially during challenging times, and your mind and body will be much better equipped to deal with the extra stress that you might be experiencing.
All great advice. And I think to a couple of your first points, build your network and don't be afraid to ask for help. I think this is a wonderful time to do both of those things. As I scroll through LinkedIn, maybe you're seeing the same thing in your LinkedIn network, but a lot of people are offering their services for free, or they're making conference registration free or discounted, or just starting conversations on LinkedIn with people. And I'm really encouraged by the outreach that's happening online. And I think for students, take advantage of that. People are raising their hand and saying, we want to hear from you and we want to help. So I think that's great advice. And of course, taking care of yourself. You can't help anyone else if if you can't help yourself. So definitely got to exercise and eat right and all that. Last question for you. Speaking of taking care of yourself, reading is an element of taking care of yourself, doing some things that you enjoy. So one question that we always ask on the Leverage Your Potential podcast is, what are you currently reading? What do you have a bookmark in right now?
Well, during shelter in place, we have a little bit more time on our hands to pursue things like this. And I think because of the situation we're in, I was looking for something to read that wasn't quite as heavy, I think. So I had been wanting to read these books for a while. And just this past weekend, I wrapped up the 4 Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante. The first in the series is called My Brilliant Friend, in case you haven't heard that. There's also an HBO series out with that. So if you're not familiar with this author, Elena Ferrante it's a pseudonym, and there's been much speculation about who she or he might be, but not any particular confirmed identity. And I was originally drawn to the series because I'm really intrigued by someone who can simultaneously have international notoriety as an author, but also maintain such strict anonymity. I found that really interesting and intriguing. The books it's a series of books, and it's about the lifelong friendship of 2 girls in post-war Italy. Beyond its absolutely unique perspective on friendships, especially over time, the books explore the impact of education on your life, the impact of gender inequality, and also how where you grow up shapes who you are. And coincidentally, since we're talking about resilience, as I reflect on this, both of the main characters show a lot of grit and resilience throughout their lifetime. One of the things that strikes me is that the resilience looks different at different stages of life, given what's important to you at that time, and also who's depending on you. So resilience is going to look different for you when you're a young adult than when you actually have children who are relying on you. Or even later in life, maybe when you have a savings nest egg and you can make different choices because you're able to make different choices as well. But overall, I recommend the books highly.
And it's the Neapolitan series. Is that what it is?
It's a series. It's 4. It's called the Neapolitan Quartet. It's 4 books. The author is Elena Ferrante, and the first in the series is called My Brilliant Friend.
Very intriguing, the anonymity perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to one day discover who it is.
Yeah.
So, Angela, thank you so much for joining us on Leverage Your Potential, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leverage Your Potential podcast. Episodes are posted weekly and can be found on our blog at blog.menlo.edu/career-services/. Make it a great day.